On this episode of Two Broads Talking Politics, we're speaking with Raven Douglas, the political director of Move Texas. I'm super excited about everything that's happening in Texas, and you will be too. Don't forget to catch our live stream on election night starting at 6 p.m. Eastern, November 3rd. You can find all the details at waveelection.show. Hope to see you there. Hi, everyone. This is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, and I am thrilled to be joined today by Raven Douglas, who is the political director for Move Texas. Anyone who's been listening to Two Broads for a while knows that I love talking Texas politics. So welcome, Raven.
Hi, happy to be here.
Yeah, I am excited to talk to you. This is fortuitous timing, I think, because Texas voting is just in the news everywhere right now.
Yes.
So let's start by talking a little bit about Move Texas and what the organization does.
Yeah, so MOVE is an acronym. It stands for Mobilize, Organize, Vote, and Empower. And we are a grassroots, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to build power in youth communities all across the state. So what does that actually look like in practice? So we register young people to vote. This year, in the middle of a pandemic with no online voter registration in Texas, we were able to register over 50,000 young people to vote. And in addition to that, we have and it's the department that I oversee, is we have a pretty robust advocacy program. And so it's really great if we can get young people registered to vote and turn them out to vote. But if there's no polling location at their college campus, what good does that do? And so we have been working, especially in the middle of COVID, to really try to make voting as accessible and easy as possible, not only to young voters, but Texans all across the state.
So I want to know a little bit about you too. So what is your background? How did you get into doing this work?
Yeah, so, I will start by saying I'm 24. So when we say that Move is youth-led, that's really true. But I really started in this work because, growing up, we didn't talk about civic engagement from the perspective of voting. We were active in our communities. My mom ran our church food pantry. But when it came to voting, I don't remember, going to the polls with my parents and things of that nature. And so I really didn't get involved in politics, especially grassroots politics and organizing, until I went to college at the University of Texas at San Antonio. And so that's actually where Move was started. We were started as a student chapter by some young folks who just wanted to increase civic engagement. And so that's where I really learned about the politics of Texas. And Texas is not a red or blue state, but it's a non-voting state. And polling locations are closed in communities of color. And so as a Black woman, those things really interested me. And so I really got invested into the intersection of race and voting. And so, now I'm 24, I'm doing this work, helping to lead a phenomenal team of young people across the state to really fight for voter accessibility.
Yeah. So I always have to ask when we're talking young people, how you define young. So I know I'm not young anymore. I'm 42. So clearly I'm outside of that. But what does that mean for an organization like you? Who are you targeting in this?
Yeah. So we particularly focus on young voters between the ages of 18 and 39. But, some organizations, they focus on folks under 45, but we really look at that kind of key 18 to 39 demographic.
Yeah. And so I've heard this many times, this Texas isn't red or blue. It's a non-voting state. We talked to a lot of people running for office in Texas in 2018 and then again now. I think that might change this time, right? I don't think Texas is going to be termed a non-voting state anymore. What does voting look like in Texas right now?
I certainly hope so. We are seeing record number voter turnout here in the state, and it's very exciting to see. And not only are we seeing it just across the board, but we're seeing it particularly in youth communities. I saw a report that came out by Circle this past Friday, and it said that young voters in Texas have casted more ballots than any other state in the country. And usually Texas is dead last in voter turnout. So I'm hoping that we can finally get rid of this narrative that we're apathetic in Texas and, we're not engaged. And really the issue is that we just need people in our communities like Move to really encourage folks to vote. And I think that we're finally seeing that work pay off. So I'm excited to see what happens this election.
So as you're working with young voters, talking to young voters, and MOVE is a nonpartisan organization, but what are the issues that are really driving young voters right now? What are the things that are motivating them to come out and vote?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think Texas is unique in the fact that there are so many issues impacting us here, right? So Texas is a state with one of the highest uninsured rates. We emit some of the highest carbon emissions. In some of our largest cities, we're really seeing a public housing crisis. We have terrible public transportation. And so especially when you're talking to young people in Texas, we're also along the border. So we have a large undocumented community here in Texas. And so oftentimes when we're telling people, young people, we're not a monolith and there are so many issues that are impacting us. I definitely think that some of the top things are definitely climate change here in Texas, as well as things related to economic justice. So affordable housing, public transportation, a living wage. Those are the things that we're really starting to drive, young people. But more so, we're starting to realize that everyone is different and everyone has an issue that's important to them. And so that's really why I love organizing in youth communities, because we are less likely to be party affiliated and more likely to be issue based. And so it's really great to talk to folks, about the issues and then show them how elections and elected officials really impact those issues. And that way we can really help turn folks out and really connect them and educate them on our system.
So you said you wanted to dispel this notion that Texans are apathetic about politics and voting. And it seems to me that it's not ever been really apathy, right? It's been active voter suppression, and which then, sort of cycles into, well, why should I bother? And so tell me a little bit about what that looks like, what voter suppression has looked like in Texas, what it looks like right now.
Kelly, where do I begin with voter suppression in Texas? So, pre-COVID, we didn't have the best voting system and things weren't accessible. So in Texas, we don't have any sort of online voter registration. All of our voter registration prior to COVID was happening person to person, one-on-one. Post-COVID, we've had to send out over 300,000 voter registration applications by mail to young people to get them registered to vote. Here in Texas, you can vote with your concealed handgun license, but you can't vote with your student ID. Things like we have a 30-day voter registration deadline. So all of those things have been existing and persisting. But I think what we have seen in COVID is an additional layer of voter suppression, particularly through litigation and lawsuits. So just in the past 2 weeks, there have been a handful of lawsuits that are really attempting to confuse voters. So I'm sure that everyone has heard about the governor closing the mail-in drop-off boxes in the state. And so in Houston is larger than 26 states. And so imagine having one place to be able to drop off your mail-in ballot in Texas. There's been litigation on who qualifies for a mail-in ballot, because in Texas, basically, there are only 4 requirements that you have to meet to meet that. So in the middle of a pandemic, you cannot vote by mail if you aren't out of the county or over 65 or sick and disabled. We've seen litigation challenging by the Texas Republican Party, challenging the 3 weeks of early voting that we've gotten this election. And so all of this stuff is happening literally as people are casting their ballots. And so it is a concerted and strategic effort to confuse voters and make them not want to vote. And so we're really trying to combat that with proactive messaging, making sure that everyone has the right information, because it can be really challenging right now.
Yeah, that drop box for ballots thing is just, I live in Chicago, so within Cook County, and just in the city of Chicago, I can name at least 52 places where you can go drop off your ballot. I can walk to my closest one. The idea of trying to limit that is so mind-boggling.
It is. And I also saw something last week that said in LA County, which is the largest county in the country, they have 392 drop-off locations. And so in Harris County, we're the 3rd largest in the country, and we only have 1. And so imagine if you don't have a car. Imagine if I grew up in Southwest Houston, getting down to the NRG Center where the drop-off location is, it could take you 40 minutes. And so it's intentional and it's strategic to make it harder for people to turn in their ballots.
So talking about COVID, we know that there are people who may get COVID. Numbers are spiking right now all over the country, may get COVID in these final 9 days before the election happens. And I know that there's a ruling in Texas that you need to have a doctor's note to get an absentee ballot if that happens. Can you talk a little bit about what MOVE is doing in reaction to that?
Yes. So the first thing we did was sue the state over that litigation. We tried to get a temporary injunction. It's the middle of COVID. We shouldn't be making, before the pandemic, we shouldn't have been making people pay to go to a doctor, because it's essentially a poll tax in order to be able to vote by mail. And so we worked with our legal partners at the Texas Civil Rights Project to try to challenge that law. And so unfortunately, we did not win and did not prevail in that lawsuit. But we have actually set up a telemedicine hotline where doctors have volunteered their time to work and see people via telehealth and video in order to get them a doctor's note so they can request that mail-in ballot. And so the vote by mail application deadline has passed here in Texas. So the telemedicine hotline is active. So if you go to our website, movetexas.org, you'll get all the information for that. And so hopefully we can, for free, get some folks able to vote and able to get a mail-in ballot in time to vote by November 3rd.
What are some of the ways that you get your messaging out? I know you're on social media and other places. I think that's sort of the perennial thing that people in politics think about. How do we reach young people? Where are they? So what are some of the things that MOVE does for that?
That's a great question. And that's honestly a question that we get from candidates, campaigns, elected officials. And my response every time is that they're in your communities. You know, we're not hiding. You have to go where we are. And so in COVID, you know, thankfully our demographic is on social media. And so we have really seen a lot of traction, particularly on Instagram and Twitter. And so some things that we have been seeing working is we do what we call Move U, which is short for Move University, where we have lunchtime chats about different issues. So whether it's about voting or climate change or what's happening with COVID or criminal justice, we're able to bring in subject matter experts and have around 20-minute long conversations about what's impacting our youth communities. Also, something that we're really seeing on social media is these kind of infographics. So I'm sure you've seen them, and it says something like what's happening with USPS. And so it's about 4 or 5 slides kind of explaining what's happening and giving you a call to action. And we've really been able to see a lot of engagement and impressions on those kind of things. And I think what we're really seeing is that people are just looking for the right information. So anytime we're able to put out some sort of educational content, we really see a lot of people eat that up. And then also, you know, it helps if it's pretty, right? So if you make a pretty flyer or connect it to what's happening culturally or in our communities, we're really seeing that take off. And so outside of our, you know, traditional phone banking and text banking and things of that nature, we've really been able to utilize social media as a helpful tool.
So I've seen all over the country, of course, these long, long lines for people to vote everywhere. And we're seeing that, of course, in Texas as well. But we're also seeing people finding ways to make standing in line fun. What sorts of things are happening like that in Texas? What are the kinds of ways you're making sure that as people are standing in these terribly long lines, that it's not just a sort of terrible experience for them?
Yeah. So, you know, before talking about, you know, fun things that we're doing in lines, I think it's important to note that although our state is really keen on ensuring that voters are disenfranchised and voter suppression is live and well, we have actually been working through a coalition called Democracy from the Ground Up to focus specifically on county level voter accessibility, advocacy, and organizing. And so really what we're seeing at the county level, and I think Harris County is a really great example of them actually increasing voter accessibility. So in Harris County, they have over 122 early voting sites. There will be over 800 election day sites. This last week of early voting, which starts this week, the polls will be open till 10 p.m. They're piloting 24-hour polling locations. They have drive-through polling locations, which were also challenged by the Houston Republican Party in the middle of early voting. But I think we've really been able to see the power of and the benefits of elections being ran at the county level, because in Texas, there are 254 counties, and really they are all ran at the county level. So it can either go really good or really bad. But nonetheless, there are some counties who are not as accessible, don't have as much polling locations. And so what we are doing is we worked with Democracy is Delicious, which is a national network of chefs that are providing food at the polls. And so we're working right now to coordinate that for this last week of early voting, as well as on election day. And then also yesterday was National Vote Early Day. And so we are finally starting to branch out a little bit and do in-person work. And we had one of our first party at the polls this year. And so we were able to have free swag and masks, and we had these 5-foot tall vote letters where people could take pictures, and we had a button maker. And so we wanted to be able to celebrate voting. I think oftentimes people see, voting as not as so much as a burden, but you have to wait in line for 5 hours and you've really got to buckle down. And so to a certain extent, I think that's true, but let's make it fun. Let's provide music, and let's hope that at least this little wait or the long wait is somewhat enjoyable.
Yeah, definitely. I love all those pictures of the sort of partying at the polls. I think that's really fun. I love that we don't have voter suppression here, and that I can, just walk to the nearest thing and drop off my polling thing. But I do kind of feel like I'm missing out on the party that everyone else gets to have right now. So I think, you're starting to get at this anyway. But one thing I've been super concerned with is, we're all focused on this next week and this really important election. But we need to keep going after that. I mean, I think that is what we saw after 2008, right? There were lots of excitement to vote and people went out, and then a lot fewer people voted in 2010. And so how do we make sure that this keeps going forward, that this is sustainable?
That's a really great question. And, one of the things at MOVE that we pride ourselves on is that we're an evergreen organization. And so being an evergreen organization essentially means that we are in communities every single day. And so I think that sustaining presence is really critical in continuing to build off of what's happening in 2020 and ensure that we have increased voter turnout in 2022 and 2024. So that means, I think oftentimes what happens is that campaigns kind of come in October, November, and then they leave. And so especially in youth communities. And so what we think that's super critical is that we have that sustaining organizing and community presence, because we know that this not only is the presidential election really important, but our county commissioners are really important. And next year in several cities in Texas, we have city council races. And so being able to focus on those local politics and local races are especially important. And we know that if we can get a young person next year, if we can get them to vote in the presidential election this year, and if we can get them to vote in their city council race next year in the constitutional election, that person will likely be a lifetime voter. And so we need to continue that engagement to ensure that we sustain these patterns.
Yeah, I love that. So if people are listening and want to help out the work that MOVE is doing, how can they do that?
Yes. So, one, feel free to visit us. We're young folks, so we are live on social media. So feel free to follow us at move_Texas. Also, we're a nonprofit. And in order to do the work that we do, we have to raise our dollars. And so if you want to help us continue to turn out young folks, feel free to donate at movetexas.org/donate.
Was there anything else that you wanted to make sure we talk about?
I think the only thing that I've kind of been telling everyone in my closing statement is I think I completely agree with you. I think we're all really focused right now on early voting. But I think my messaging to everyone about Election Day is that I don't think that we will know who the president will be on November 3rd. And that's okay. And don't panic. We want to be able to count every single ballot, every single mail-in ballot, ensure that the results are accurate and secure. And that may take a couple of weeks. That may take a month. But we're going to ensure that our democracy is working in the way that it's supposed to. And that may take some time. So, don't panic, because we just want to make sure that the system is playing out how it's supposed to.
Yeah. And the young people that you work with are probably largely too young to remember this. But I remember in 2000 that we didn't know the results for quite some time. So this isn't unprecedented. This can happen. And yeah, this is just the way the system works. So excellent advice. Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, Raven, thank you so much for joining me today. This was a great conversation, and I am just thrilled with the work that your group and all the organizers in Texas is doing right now. It is super exciting to see and gives me so much hope for the future.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Really excited to see what happens on November 3rd.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at twobroadstalk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.